Hello students, welcome to another video with me, Professor William Wright. Today going over, sorry, I'm recording in the studio again, so loud exhaust is part of the street culture here. No, in any case, yes, we're up at our shop on the Square Indicator recording part 2 of chapter 21, The Modern World. And this is from Living with Art by Mark Getlein. We already got through the first half of the slides, so I'm just jumping in after we discussed the transition from Romanticism to Realism to then Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, and then Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. And now I just want to take a little tour across. We're not going to, there's not a lot that I'm going to say about America in the 19th century, because the reality is, for the most part, while of course art was being made by and for Americans in America, there was sort of a focus on developing the country of America. And so there was a little bit less there. Now, we know we've already talked about neoclassicism was a part of American art culture by the time we get to 1800. In Monticello being kind of modeled after the Romans and the Greeks, even the Capitol being modeled after Roman and Greek architecture. But as we look at, and then of course neoclassical political art makes its way into, we looked at a portrait of Paul Revere, and there's that sculpture of George Washington. But there are other movements that make their way there. Now, starting out the 20th or the 19th century, I should say, sorry, we see here in Bingham's work, this is kind of a slide just showing the little bits of those movements that we've already looked at that have made their way to America. America basically does its own version of Europe. I mean, because remember, these people are just an extension of the European people that were the colonizers. But we see Romanticism in the first piece here, the top left, this picture of the trappers and their almost heroic stature as they move across the Missouri River, trapping skins, and they've actually got a little pet bear cub that they've captured. And this is definitely, meant to be kind of a scene of Romanticism and highlighting, the American West. We'll talk more about that one, but we've also got Thomas Eakins, who does this painting of the rowers, which we've looked at before. I would call this a scene of realism, right? They're naturalistically depicted. They're very faithfully depicted. It's a scene of people just doing regular things, regular people. And then, of course, Mary Cassatt is good for looking at Impressionism, and how Impressionism, although it's not like super heavy-duty Impressionism, it's got a little bit of Post-Impressionism in it too. The bright colors, it's sort of painterly, just a scene of a woman and her child at leisure, on this boat ride. In any case, so those are sort of some of the artists that we see reflecting those European movements. But another movement that I would say is kind of exclusive to America is what we call American Romanticism, right? And it's an interpretation of it that basically is Romanticism in America, based on the ideas of westward expansion and manifest destiny, right? So it's this idea of America and the westward expansion through America as this, God-ordained thing that, it shows the natural world and the beauty and bigness that is the American West, and is supposed to depict how the American culture is supposed to spread that way. But it's also just highlighting the beauty that is America, and how the culture of America is meant to be there. And we see it's always Bierstadt is the main guy that I talk about, but the whole there's an entire group of guys called the Hudson River School out of New York that kind of paint in this way. I think Thomas Cole is one. There's several other guys. There's a guy who always paints flowers. We've looked at him before. But in any case, my dad would be mad I don't remember. But off the top of my head, Bierstadt's the main one that I talk about. It's just this big sort of, there's always this bright light and big, beautiful clouds on a cliff face, and then some water and some little like deer or some kind of wild animal moving through the scene, just depicting again how beautiful and big America is, and how this we're meant to expand through this beautiful land, right? That's sort of the idea of westward expansion and American Romanticism as a school of, and it's very naturalistic in its depiction. It's all about the landscape. It's kind of heroic in nature. It's very romantic, In any case, now moving through several movements here really quick. The first two terms are actually ones I'm going to tell you because they're only shown on this slide. So if you want to pause and write them down, they're good to see here. And then the first two are like broader terms, and then the last four are specific movements under Expressionism. But in any case, the term avant-garde, if any of you haven't heard of it, is something we often apply to like really cutting edge, like brand new, something you've never seen before artwork, right? Art that is pushing the boundaries. And it actually is originally a military term referring to soldiers who went first, the cutting edge, right? The front edge. The front guard is literally what it means in French. But by the 1880s, it becomes a term used to describe the boldest artists who were attempting to advance the progress of art against the resistance of conservative forces. So that stuffy neoclassical and romantic, those schools, we're going to push against them, and we're going to keep pushing boundaries. These are like the post-impressionists. These are the expressionists that we're going to talk about in a minute. These are guys that are pushing the boundaries and going to new areas, fighting against that tight, stuffy academic end of the stuff. Like I said, neoclassical, romantic, that's some of the movements that fall under overly academic. Pre-Raphaelite brotherhoods, those are guys that we might talk about in an advanced art history class. But these are guys that, like I said, avant-garde's pushing against those stuffy old school artists who are all about restraint and the Renaissance and Romans and Greeks. But in any case, this leads to a group of artists called the Expressionists. Now, it's a series of art movements that moved through the early 20th century and claimed the right to distort visual appearance in order to express psychological or emotional states. Expressionists are generally characterized by bold color, distortion of form, and stress the artist's emotional, personal, or psychological expression. Basically, it's the artist saying, hey, I can paint whatever I want, and if you like it, cool. If not, this is what I wanted to paint, right? This is the artist making the art for himself. He has the inner need to express his psychological, emotional state. That's Expressionism, okay? And like I said, it's a big, broad art movement that really covers all the rest of these four. And those we're going to talk about in each slide as we move through the next, or move through the types of Expressionism. So the first type of Expressionist movement we're going to talk about is the Fauvist. There's actually more even than what we're going to get in the slideshow in terms of expressions. But in any case, Fauvism is a short-lived but influential expressionist movement in France in the early 20th century, characterized by bold, arbitrary, and expressive color. Arbitrary meaning like just totally because they wanted to. They didn't need to make the color big and bold, but they wanted to. The term fauve comes from, it's fauves is a French term for wild beasts, which if you look at the color and you think about the idea is that this aggressive bright color is so wild, it's almost animal-like in nature. The artists include Matisse and Doran. Now Matisse paints these pictures of, they're like figures with really big outlines of bold color, often complementary colors, right? We have the yellow and the purple, we have the red and the green, we have the orange and the blue, right? It's all about color theory and color scheme, and pointlessly colorful, right? They don't need it again. It's just meant to be expressive when they use the color. Matisse actually too, fun fact, as a potter I have to share, his great-grandson, Alex Matisse, runs a pottery called East Fork Pottery. Him and his family have basically started an amazing business based on making ceramic work. He started as a potter himself, and it's become much bigger than just him as an individual, and it's a very cool thing. East Fork Pottery, you should check it out. But we have some of their pieces. But yeah, this is, the beginning of an artistic lineage. I say beginning. I'm not sure if Matisse's, Henri's parents might have been in the art world. But in any case, in the early 1900s, Henri Matisse, he's working as Fauvist, and Doran does the same sort of arbitrary use of color. It's, the trees are blue and then purple and then red, and the color is used in as an expressive, independent element. No longer did it have to be used to replicate real colors of the natural world. Okay, so from there we have German Expressionism, which is just specific to the Germans, and again, several movements within this. So the Expressionist groups in Germany, it includes the Bridge in Dresden, which includes Kirchner and Nolde, and the Blue Riders in Munich. And this is all, from the early 1905 to 1911. Kandinsky and Mark Kandinsky we've looked at before. He's very well known for having these sort of, he's the guy who does all the concentric circles that are sort of loosely painted, and they're very, again, very expressive. It's all about color theory, but they're totally non-objective. They don't even look like anything else anymore. It's all about the relationship of line and shape and color. He's kind of like the big one. But we also see these very colorful, very loose, kind of psychologically imbued depictions of a landscape. Right, this is a landscape that goes all the way up to the sky. The houses don't even look real. There's trees bigger than houses. This is a print by Nolde, so it's just black and white, stark, aggressive line work, really like flat. But in any case, it's all about the depiction of the shapes, the lines. It's very abstract, meaning sometimes it's mostly abstract in that it looks like something from real life, but it's changed. It's distorted. That's abstract. But then Kandinsky is actually not objective. He pushes it even further. Although they say Kandinsky a lot of times would work with music. He would use music to inspire him. They said he might have had synesthesia where he saw colors, as he listened to loud noises and things. But in any case, his work is really important in the early 20th century. But yeah, then of course we get this guy, Mr. Big Shot. No, he kind of covers everything. He's very innovative. Picasso, this is a painting he did when he was, I think he's 15 actually. I've said younger before, but 15. He is a protege. He does amazing naturalistic realism paintings, but then very quickly he begins to decide he wants to be expressionist. He moves away. He can paint tightly, but he learns how to. Sorry, I just knocked over the our studio. Anyway, he paints very naturalistically. He changes and alters things to show the psychological stories that he wants to tell. This is a depiction of his mother, I believe, or grandmother. It's not about perfect proportion as much as it is about setting a scene, right, and setting an emotional state. He does, of course, we know about the kind of mythological stories he pulls from, the inspiration of Guernica, which actually happens, during his lifetime, and he paints this response to the bombing of that city. We talked about that earlier in the semester. But it's all about psychology, and he's really inventing his own forms of expressionism, and this leads to his most notable form of expressionism, that is Cubism. It's developed by him and his roommate Brock. It's a movement developed during the early 20th century by Picasso and Brock. It is the most, in its most severe analytical phase, Cubism abstracts the forms of the visible world into fragments or facets drawn from multiple viewpoints, then constructed an image from them which had its own internal logic. So basically, he would take the scene, cut it up, paint it like, he'd paint one part of the face looking forward, then he'd paint the other part of the face looking sideways, and then he'd paint the other part of the face looking up. And so we'd get eyes that are pointing the wrong direction, foreheads that, have a third eye on them. There's just this distorted way of doing it, but it wasn't random. He would decide like, okay, now we're going to paint it this way, and it's very geometric in nature. It's fragmented. It's turned into flat facets, drawn from multiple viewpoints, like I said. And then it has its own logic, but it's the logic that he decides, not the logic that the world recreates. Now, figure and background are equally important to early Cubist work, right? Because the background, we look here at this blue kind of fabric in the background, or water, whatever it is, but it almost sticks out in front of the figures. The figures themselves are very simplistically drawn. Again, very angular, flat color, not a lot of modeling, developing, full form or anything like that. It's just flat skin tones. Also, the faces are often drawn. This is an important thing because it's the beginning of the study of certain or opening up to the idea that ancient and tribal artworks, of America, of Africa, of other areas of the world outside of that European Western civilization through line, they are making art that artists are beginning to say man, that's beautiful in its own way. It's expressionist in the ancient world. Expressionism in the ancient world. We think about the Greek Cycladic, geometric figures. We think about all the masquerade masks that we've looked at throughout art history sections that we've looked at before. And the artists like Picasso and other Europeans are just starting to say what, some of that art in its abstraction is just as beautiful and more sophisticated even than what we've been doing in Italy and in France prior to this. So they start putting expressionism inspired by ancient tribal cultures or even contemporary tribal cultures into a lot of their artwork. So these figures have almost African mask or masquerade mask, almost Navajo mask type figures to them. And that's not accidental. It also pulls back to these women are very angular. They're very powerful and aggressive. That pulls back to Gauguin's depiction of the Tahitian women, right? So Picasso is building on what's been before, but then also developing this new form of expressionism. And like I said, it's alongside Braque, who as I understand, was at one point his roommate. He started as an impressionist and had to work really hard at it. He was not a prodigy. He came to it late in life and had to really develop, come into his own. Clearly inspired by Cézanne and Gauguin, but he comes to the same place as Picasso with Cubism, right? Looking at objects, drawing it from angles, flattening it, turning it into different shapes, and then rearranging it. These guys work together to do this. I always heard it's kind of a joke, but Picasso gets most of the credit because he paid the rent more. He already had an established following. So I don't know, that's probably just a joke. But they both, there are people who defend Braque as the founder of Cubism, but it's a contemporary, they're working together, but they both get credit for developing this new form of expressionism in Cubism. Okay, that analytical geometric breakdown of shapes. We looked at the girl with the mandolin earlier in the semester. We looked at a lot of Picasso, but in any case, yeah, that's Cubism. And then after Cubism, we get Futurism. Basically, as we move through the 19-teens, we get some new ideas happening. Futurism is this idea of painting that says we should forget all about the historical painting. We should forget all about what's come before and we should move to new. And Chirico calls his approach metaphysical painting. It's all about this sort of Chirico here. In this painting, we look at it's sort of dreamlike, it's incongruous, it just doesn't make sense what's happening. It's sort of the planes go on forever, the figure has a balloon for a head. I don't know what's going on, but here's a quote from Chirico. The most important thing is that we should rid art of all that it has contained of recognizable material to date. All familiar subject matter, all traditional ideas, all popular symbols should be banished forthwith. To become truly immortal, a work of art must escape all human limits. No logic, no common sense. It'll only interfere. Once these barriers are broken, it will enter the regions of childhood vision and dream, right? Basically, get rid of all the things we recognize and let the bizarre in, right? Get rid of all the comfort of imagery that we know before. Now, it's funny because he's kind of pulling some like columns and sculptures and things like that. So he's got the idea for it. Basically, painting very dreamlike stuff. This is the beginning of what will be surrealism. But futurists, this art movement, it is founded officially in Italy in 1909, and it's concentrating on the dynamic quality of modern technology, emphasizing speed, emphasizing movement, emphasizing development. It includes Severini, Balla, and Boccioni. Now, these guys, yeah, it's all about what's to come. This lends itself later to fascism and like the rise of communism and some other things, but for the most part, it's about getting rid of what's been done before, and it's all about looking forward. And I like to look at, I look at this dog that's sort of walking like a Scooby-Doo character. We see these figures, Boccioni, he's this figure that's sort of walking and maybe the wind is blowing. It's sort of like flowing and enveloping. It's all about movement, the repetition of lines and patterns here in Severini. Again, it's like dancing, but we don't recognize anything that's happening. It's all about movement and angles and sharpness, right? That's futurism, and it's part of expressionism, but it's kind of its own thing. Movement, speed. I think minimalism is even a part of this. We looked at Brancusi before, The Bird in Space. That's all very futurist. Even like some of the work that we've looked at with like lights, what becomes noir, stuff like that. We haven't even talked about Art Nouveau and some other like graphic design things that are happening. But focusing on expressionism, we'll keep moving. Dadaism, surrealism, and constructivism. This is like as we move to World War II or World War I and after. Sorry. Now let's look for those definitions are going to be on their own slides. So Dadaism, an international movement of the early 20th century. So it's in America and Europe. It's important to know. It's developed during World War I. Now, what's key to know here? Okay, so they believe that society itself has gone mad. They refuse to make a sense of or to provide any sort of aesthetic refuge or comfort. Instead, they make anti-art, which is all about absurdity, chance, whimsy, irony, childishness. It's deliberately shocking and provocative. It's got performance art, so there's some actions happening that become art movements and events. It's all aimed to disrupt public complacency because what I want to say is 25 million people are killed during World War I, and it's the worst death toll to date. And the whole world, there's bombs and there's gas, and these guys just keep running into machine gun fire, and it's just horrible. And they all come back with PTSD, and all of Europe is just sent through a tailspin, and it's all new in its this approach to, technology is always followed by war, or one, but sometimes war drives technology, and in any case it becomes a mess. And this reaction to it, they say the Dadaists, they just would like at one point they came up with their name, they're trying to figure it out, and they just all started making random sounds, and somebody said Dada, and that was it, right? It's just all about the absurdity of life, in lieu of the fact that we just had 25 million people die in World War I. That's horrible. How could this ever get better, right? That's the idea. In any case, they just embrace this absurdity, right? Maybe I'm reducing it down, but that's one of the things I can't help but see. Now, Dadaists incorporate into their art the ready-made, which is like another word for a found object sculpture, but it's literally just what it is. But the Dadaist with the most lasting impact on American art in the 20th century is Marcel Duchamp. He's the guy who did the fountain. He took the urinal, he turned it sideways, he wrote Armut on it, bing, boom, done, right? He drew a mustache on the Mona Lisa, called it "She is not hot in the arse," and boom, that's it, right? That's the painting, right? It's taking something that's already been and just presenting it in a new way. It's the beginning of that in some ways. This is one of the Dadaist things. And this ready-made is an object not made by the artist, but served some originally some other function, but then it is designated as a new work of art by the artist, right? Taking the unicycle wheel, putting it on a stool, boom, piece of art. Right, that's the ready-made, and it's all about the absurdity of this. And the Dadaists, we talked about too, they do collage, and they cut up people's faces and put them together so they look bizarre. Nazis with little fishnet legs and stuff like that. So this is all very Dada, Okay, so when obviously the Dadaists wouldn't have done Nazis, but you know what I mean, German soldiers, fascist, communist movement people. In any case. After Dadaism, we also get Surrealism. It's a 20th century movement, grows out of Dada, but emphasizes the imagery of dreams and fantasies, right? So Surrealists do tend to paint things that look real. They paint naturalistically, but it's just absurd, right? So painting a man standing in front of a building and it looks real, but then he's floating and he's repeated 100 times. That's pretty bizarre. His shadows on the side of the building. Painting a figure that gets smaller as it moves up. Painting a pipe and saying it's not a pipe, right? These ideas become that's what Surrealism is all about. They're also all about automatism. Writing or drawing flows straight from the subconscious, unchecked by reason or inhibition. And we're going to look at some more Dali, Oppenheim, Miro, Kahlo. These are Surrealist artists we're going to look at. But it's all about the subconscious, right? It's like a stream of consciousness. One distinct contribution of Surrealism to the art world is a poetic object. It's not a sculpture, but an object. It's a thing. It's not a carved sculpture meant to look like something, but just some weird, bizarre, usually incongruous combination of things. So yeah, it often juxtaposes incongruous elements in order to provoke a shiver of strangeness or disorientation. Oppenheim's luncheon in fur. It's a coffee cup made of fur. That doesn't sound nice at all. Man Ray's the indestructible object. It's an object that will be destroyed, right? If it's used, it will come apart. Right. It's just, I would say, I wonder if this kind of leads to the like artist shit that we see later. Right. These are just disconcerting objects that are sort of unreal. Dali, of course, is probably the most famous surrealist after Kahlo. Dali, he's already playing with photography to make these bizarre scenes of like things flowing through space. He makes it look like he's jumping into space. No, that's another guy. But they're playing with editing, moving the negatives so that they create bizarre scenes in photography. Of course, the persistence of memory, these melting clocks, ants become a popular thing in a lot of Dali's work. It's something related to dreams and fears. There's a particular a woman that he's in love with, his partner, who's again a name I can't remember now, but painting scenes of her like sexuality and then the discomfort that it gives him, the nerves that it gives him, the fears, phobias around that. That's important. Also, optical illusion. I think it was Holbein, did the stretched out skull, right? Or it was the artists we looked at earlier in the Reformation art that had that stretched out skull, but it becomes more like intentional and incorporated these bizarre optical illusions. Is it a person walking or is it an old person's face? Right. All this is happening in the surrealist movement. And again, notice it's naturalistic looking for the most part, except now we get abstraction in Moreau, Jean Moreau, little creatures of different colors. It's very expressionist, but it's also kind of bizarre and creepy in ways, like early Tim Burton-y, right? This is an example of the abstract phase of surrealism, as I said. Yeah, and it's sort of dreamlike. It's incongruous. But then we get, of course, one of the very, very most important surrealist painters is Frida Kahlo, and it's interesting because they're surrealist, but they're really all about symbolism, right? I paint my own reality. The only thing I know is I paint because I need to. I paint whatever passes through my head without any other consideration. Kahlo paints basically her autobiography. She painted this. We talked about the broken column. You know, she was in the bus accident that rendered her infertile and broke her spine. Also made her live in chronic pain. So there's the literal column that has been broken to like reflect her physical pain. As the needles also reflect the pain, the brace, the girdle she had to wear, and then there's the emotional pain that kind of follows from that. You know, encapsulated in the tears. There's this sort of version of herself that she knows she needs to be versus the version that she wants to be. There's her tumultuous relationship with Diego Rivera that we see kind of encapsulated in some of the painting, right? And it's just yeah, it's all about her story, her life, right? And they do become involved in politics. Frida even runs around with some communists as well as Diego, and they just have this like wild story. And her paintings are these surrealist symbolism paintings of all of that occurrence. So talking about her, we should also talk about Diego Rivera, her husband, who's known for being this mural artist who worked in true fresco, buon fresco, in murals, giant murals across Mexico. He is influenced by constructivism, which is it's a new movement, the Russian art movement of the early 20th century. It's based on the principles of geometric abstraction, founded by Tatlin, condemned by 1922. It is condemned by the Soviet government. When it was condemned by the Soviet regime after the communists take over, the Soviets Union, the artists left the Soviet Union to spread ideals elsewhere. I'll come back to that in a second. But when they spread their ideals elsewhere, one of the places they spread it to is Diego Rivera, and communism is also spread there. But Diego paints these scenes. They're usually in public spaces. They kind of recall older, like giant murals of ancient history, but they're all about Mexican history, right? And the politics of Mexico at the time. His desire is to communicate with everyone, leave no one out. So he tells the different stories of the different cultures in the history of Mexico and how that builds to what Mexico is today. Yeah, and now this abstraction, he doesn't go super constructivist, but the abstraction and the like scale, I guess, of a lot of his work is what's important. But in any case, as I guess Russian influence spreads that way, but also in Russia itself, Vladimir Tatlin, the founder of constructivism, he builds this model for the Third International, which is the governmental building of the new Soviet Union. Inside will be 4 pure geometric forms that house the 4 chambers of the government: a cube, a pyramid, a cone, and a sphere that would house the branches of government. The structure would rotate from once an hour to 1 revolution per year. So kind of different parts of it would fully finish revolving in an hour. Other parts would take the full year. In any case, the model itself was destroyed because it was so aggressively rejected by the new Soviet Union. But yeah, I guess I would almost say constructivism isn't the thing that Diego Rivera gets influenced by as much as communism. And again, yeah, Frida's running around with Trotsky. But basically globalization, we're getting a little glimpse of it here. But in any case, another character we should look at just to talk about constructivism, Kazimir Maevich, one of my favorite stories, although it's wild. Maevich was a constructivist. He was disliked by the Soviet Union, so he went to Berlin and across Europe, and he started teaching some of this very non-objective reduction into geometric form that we see in his paintings. And when he comes back, the reality is the Russians disliked his artistic movement so much that they threw him in jail. They used the idea that he'd been hanging out in Berlin and he was a spy and all this stuff. But yeah, he basically was put in jail for painting. It was specifically white paint on white paint. He did a white on white painting, which is a popular thing to do. And that's it for Maevich. And then when he comes out of jail, he no longer is a constructivist, right? They beat it out of him. But it's a wild story about how intense these movements can be at this time. Now, after constructivism, when the Dutch get a hold of of constructivism, when constructivism reaches the Netherlands, develops into de Stilge. Okay, de Stilge is the most famous artist associated is, of course, Mondrian, and a lot of people don't even know that de Stilge is his thing, but most people know Mondrian. Again, it's inspired by constructivism as it spreads out of the Soviet Union. Mondrian felt that nature, being irrational and irregular, encouraged mankind to be primitive, animalistic, and it resulted in war, right? His basic vision of the world is that if people surrounded themselves by rational beauty, vertical, horizontal only, primary colors only, that thus the world would become balanced, individuals become balanced themselves, and all war would end. His art, he distilled his art, that's where the name comes from. Mondrian distilled his art to what he considered to be the most universal signs of human order: vertical, horizontal lines, primary colors. Yeah, basically he thought it would lead to world peace. If we all just surrounded ourselves with only these things, no diagonals, no secondary colors, we would all calm down and there would be no more war. Sounds kooky, but at the same time, it's also pretty awesome to think about, like that's really what he thought that this simplification of things would do. This is fully non-objective work now at this point, but very cool. Now, out of that, those kind of movements, more constructivist spread in Germany, we begin to see some architectural developments of, horizontal, vertical lines, primary colors, geometric, non-objective. We're getting totally away from arches and domes and things, and it's all about squares and rectangles, right? That's it. Or there's not even geodesics. There's not even triangles, right? It's all squares and rectangles. And this leads to the Bauhaus movement, which is a school of art and architecture that develops from 1919 to 33. It's actually pretty much what we, in some ways, base our schooling on for art, even now. It is... It's felt across the 20th century. They broke down the barriers between art and craft and design. That is why design and art are taught together. We learn the elements of art and the principles of design. They basically come up with those two things. They come up with the elements of art and the principles of design in many ways. It roughly meant building house, and its leaders sought to build a new guiding principle of design compatible with 20th century technology, established by Gropius from the Weimar Academy and of Fine Arts and the Weimar Academy of Arts and Crafts. He combines them, and his aim is to unify the teaching of art under the umbrella of design with an eye for producing for the machine age. So it's lots of tubular frame, molded plastic chairs, very simple, like glass and metal framing. It shares many of the ideas of de Stilge and Russian constructivism, right? It's modern materials like chrome and plastic, suitable for mass production, right? All that. And it's all about combining arts, craft, and design. And that's Bauhaus. Now, this leads to some artists who come out of that. The geometric nature of Fernand Léger. Clear-cut, polished, ordered, very well lit. It's the machine aesthetic, right? It's the modern world. It's very hard-edged. It's very organized and geometric in nature, right? This is the movement of arts that we're seeing as the traditional the abstract era of expressionism ends. And then soon, funny enough, we get the abstract expressionist, which goes totally even further. But yeah, this is the kind of the end of de Stilge and Bauhaus It's all about geometry. Now, in the middle of all this, there's an event that I want to talk about, and that's the Armory Show of 1913. It's the first large exhibition of modern art in America, held at the 69th Regiment Armory in New York City in 1913. It was soundly criticized by the public and the press and had great impact on American artists who were influenced by the works of modern Europeans. Now, okay, so basically, there are some avant-garde Europeans that are getting a lot of hate because they're really pushing the boundaries in France, and some of them are loved, some of them are hated, and one of those artists actually is Duchamp, Marcel Duchamp, the guy that we looked at who did the fountain and all that stuff. The Duchamp family, they're all painters, and they're all kind of involved in this, but he paints this scene, this very, like, I would call this a futurist scene. It's supposed to be a nude descending a staircase. It's the scene of, like, if you could capture the movement of a person moving down a staircase, that's what we're seeing here in Duchamp's painting. In France, they hated it. And then in America, they were basically like, oh, the French hate it, bring it over here, we're going to have a show for it. We're going to put you on display, we're going to really put you on blast, right? That's what they basically say, like, oh, you don't like it? Come to the Armory Show, right? Here we see the Armory Show 1913. And of course, it is criticized by the public and the press, but it's actually like a big splash. And in America, it's the beginning of, it takes some time, but it's the beginning of New York kind of becoming the center of the art world and things shifting away from France. Now, there's some other big stuff that happens, which we'll talk about in a minute, that kind of puts the nail in that coffin. But it definitely establishes New York as the avant-garde. If you're too risky for France, come to New York, right? And we get all kinds of artists represented in the show: Impressionists, Symbolists, Post-Impressionists, Neo-Impressionists, Cubism. Remember, Neo just means new, so they're like new Impressionists. We get other American artists get their work there. It's not just Europeans, but people get, it just becomes a big show because it's very new and establishes New York, right? Other artists whose work was seen in the U.S. for the first time in this show is Kandinsky, Picasso, Brancusi, and Duchamp. So this is the first time we see Picasso in America. The first time we see Kandinsky in America. Brancusi, the bird in space guy. All this stuff. Yeah, it's and then I think this would be a Matisse, right? Yeah, it's other Fauvists and Cubists. In any case, I'm not really sure that's a Matisse. I shouldn't have been quoted, but just that has the look. Oh, in any case, sorry, wrong way. Now, another important thing that happens when New York becomes a center of art world development is the city of New York has this area in it known as Harlem, and the Harlem Renaissance begins when people start to focus on New York as this artistic center. They say, hey, there's all these African American artists and this whole new culture of Africans in America that have made their own culture, and it's centered right here in the neighborhood of Harlem in the mid and late 20s. So it's all those post World War I immigrants and post Reconstruction immigrants from the South. They move up north to become the economic, political, and cultural center of Black America. Writers, painters, sculptors celebrate the cultural traditions of African Americans, the culture of Africa, the realities of modern life, and of course, the legacy of slavery. This is not just a visual art movement. You've also got Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Bessie Smith, Cab Calloway, all these artists down here at the bottom. Musicians: Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Nat King Cole, Billie Holiday, Ethel Waters, all these figures that are not just visual artists, they're also writers, there's painters, there's sculptors, but there's, of course, musicians. The Roaring Twenties kicks off, and it opens the door for the Harlem Renaissance, right? And it's really a beautiful thing to see the Africans that are here develop this culture, right? And they get the attention of the public. In the 30s, we have this artist, Aaron Douglas, from slavery through Reconstruction. He uses what they call geometric symbolism. So it's expressionism, but it's his own, like, African-American version of it that is telling the story of Black life in America. But we have the Fauvist color scheme, right? There's a lot of color scheme. There's the geometric abstraction of Bauhaus and constructivism. It's just overall, it's kind of cubist. There's a lot of play of, it's monochromatic or analogous, right? I don't know. There's a lot of intentionality behind the color scheme. It's very much an expressionist movement all its own, but they call it geometric symbolism because it is telling a specific story from this particular viewpoint. Now, in any case, as we end this chapter, this is a great place for me to end. As the 20s end and the 30s begin, some stuff, crazy stuff happens. The stock market crash in 29 really sets things off, and then the Great Depression begins. And of course, there is art always developing throughout this time, but there's a focus on surviving economically. Now, a lot of photographers really kick off some journalistic. It's already begun. They begin journalism in the Civil War, but as we get to the 1930s, journalism, Dorothea Lange taking this picture of the mother in the Depression. It's just photographic artistry really starts to come into its own. But in addition to that, as the 30s end, World War II begins. And then if the Dadists were upset about the 25 million people that were killed in World War I, what comes next, the killing of 75 million people that occurs during World War II, it sets the world off in a whole nother direction. Now, in any case, that kind of is how we end as we move through the 30s. Now, I have the chapter 22 is going to cover the rest of the 20th century, or at least up to the 80s, and that will be in another video. But that ends part 2 of chapter 21. I hope you liked it. Find the slides on your online classroom, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.